All right, strap in, everyone. Today we're diving deep into a world that's a bit like a sci-fi thriller.
Oh, are we talking about like alien invasions or something?
Well, not exactly aliens, but close. We're talking about the microscopic world of microbes, the ones that have evolved these incredible ways to basically outsmart our immune systems.
Immune evasion. That is a pretty wild topic. It's happening inside us all right now.
Right. You gave me some fascinating articles from the scientists about this, and I gotta say, I never really appreciated just how clever these tiny organisms really are.
Yeah, they really are.
We're talking about malaria, tuberculosis, bacteria, HIV,
Yeah.
even that fungus, Candida albicans. I mean, they've all got these secret weapons they use.
Yeah, it's true. And what I think is really interesting is, it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach. Each microbe has its own unique bag of tricks.
So it's like each one has its own strategy, like its own playbook.
Exactly, yeah, like a playbook for staying under the radar.
So let's unpack some of these playbooks, shall we? Let's start with malaria. This parasite, it's infamous for its ability to hide and wreak havoc, of course.
Oh, yeah.
The article specifically mentioned Plasmodium falciparum. That's the species behind the most severe type of malaria, right?
Right.
And it seems like their main tactic, at least from what I gathered, is to basically just go undercover.
You could say that, yeah. Plasmodium falciparum, it's like a master of disguise. And it uses this protein called PFEMP1 that it displays on the surface of infected red blood cells. And you see, normally our red blood cells are smooth, they're flexible, they just flow really easily through the bloodstream. But when Plasmodium falciparum infects a red blood cell, it basically weaponizes this PFEMP1. It turns it into this sticky grappling hook.
Wait, hold on. It's making the infected cells sticky? On purpose?
On purpose.
Why would it do that?
Well, think of it this way. It's all about stealth. These sticky cells, they latch onto the blood vessel walls, so they're hiding from the immune system.
Oh, so they can't be found as easily.
Right. Imagine your blood vessels are like this bustling highway.
Yeah.
And the immune cells, they're like the patrol cars, right? They're looking for anything suspicious.
Yeah.
So by sticking to the sides, it's like those infected cells are pulling off the road and they just become invisible to the patrol.
Okay, that's pretty sneaky.
Right.
So how does it even create this sticky PFEMP1 protein?
Well, this is where things get really fascinating. The parasite has this whole arsenal of genes called VAR genes. And think of these genes like blueprints. They're blueprints for different versions of PFEMP1.
Okay.
And each Plasmodium falciparum has between 60 and 70 of these genes.
60 to 70 genes just for one protein. That seems a little excessive, doesn't it?
Well, it might seem that way, but it's really anything but. This massive gene family, it allows the parasite to constantly change its PFEMP1 code. And it's a tactic called antigenic variation.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Imagine, you're trying to catch a thief, but this thief, they constantly change their disguise.
That would make things difficult, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it incredibly difficult for the immune system to keep up because by the time it learns to recognize one version of PFEMP1, the parasite has already switched to a different one.
Oh, wow. So it's not just hiding, it's actively, like, changing its appearance to stay ahead of the game.
Right. It's like a microscopic chameleon. And to make things even more complex, the parasite doesn't just switch between these VAR genes at random, it actually senses its environment, like the host's immune response, the nutrient availability, and it changes which VAR gene it expresses based on what it senses.
Hold on. It's not just changing. It's changing based on what's happening around it. It's like it's making strategic decisions. I mean, that's pretty smart for, a single-celled organism.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's incredibly smart for something so small. This ability to sense and respond to those environmental cues, it adds this whole other layer to this, to the parasite's immune evasion tactics. I mean, think about it. The parasite might decide to express a specific VAR gene that allows it to, stick to certain types of blood vessels, or it might switch to another one when it senses the host's immune system is getting close to recognizing it.
My mind is kind of blown right now. So we've got this parasite, it's hiding, but it's also constantly changing its disguise strategically to outsmart our immune systems. I'm guessing this is why developing a malaria vaccine has been, so challenging, right?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. This ability to switch between all those different PFEMP1 proteins, it's one of the biggest hurdles. Because a vaccine, it would have to target multiple versions of the protein. And even then, there's always the chance that the parasite could evolve new variations.
It sounds like this constant arms race between the parasite and our immune system.
Absolutely. And speaking of arms races, Let's move on to another formidable foe, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the bacteria behind tuberculosis.
Oh, yeah.
This microbe, it's got a long history of surviving inside humans, and it's evolved some pretty impressive strategies to manipulate the immune system.
Well, from what I read, it seems like Mycobacterium tuberculosis has a completely different approach to malaria. It's not really about hiding. It's more like it goes on the offensive.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. It targets macrophages. And macrophages, those are the immune cells that are supposed to engulf and destroy invaders. So imagine, like, macrophages are the body's first responders, rushing to the scene of an infection to neutralize the threat, right? But Mycobacterium tuberculosis has figured out a way to not only survive inside these macrophages, but to actually use them to its own advantage.
That's a bold move. So how does it manage to pull off this cellular hijacking? I'm intrigued.
It all comes down to this fascinating interplay of proteins. Mycobacterium tuberculosis, it produces two proteins, SHH and SXG. And these proteins, they disrupt the normal functioning of this process. It's called the ESCRT machinery.
ESCRT machinery. I don't think I'm familiar with that. Could you break that down for me a little?
Sure. Imagine the ESCRT machinery as the cell's waste disposal system. So it's responsible for taking unwanted proteins and other cellular debris and delivering them to lysosomes. And lysosomes are basically like the cell's recycling centers, right?
So it's like a cellular cleanup crew.
Exactly. And so this is where things get really interesting. SXH and SXG interfere with that system. So they prevent the bacteria from being sent to the lysosomes to be destroyed.
So they basically jam the garbage disposal.
Exactly. They jam the garbage disposal, which allows Mycobacterium tuberculosis to just hang out inside the macrophage, safe and sound.
So not only is this bacteria hiding inside the macrophages, but it's actively preventing the cell from, like, cleaning it up.
It is. It's a double whammy.
That's a double whammy for sure.
And it doesn't stop there. These proteins, they also disrupt something called antigen presentation.
Antigen presentation. Now remind me, that's basically how the immune system recognizes invaders and mounts the targeted attack, right?
You got it. When a macrophage engulfs a pathogen, it breaks it down, and it displays fragments of it on its surface.
Oh, great.
Like a wanted poster.
Yeah. Okay.
And those fragments, they're called antigens. They alert other immune cells, like T cells, to the presence of the invader. And that triggers that specific immune response.
So it's like raising the alarm to call in backup.
Exactly. But SXH and SXG, they interfere with this whole communication system, so it makes it much harder for the immune system to actually recognize and attack the bacteria.
So Mycobacterium tuberculosis, it's not just hiding inside the macrophage. It's actively sabotaging the immune response. I mean, this is why tuberculosis is such a persistent infection to treat.
Right. You're absolutely right. And it has another trick up its sleeve, this protein called CPSA. And that protects it from another type of immune attack. This one involves something called reactive oxygen species.
Reactive oxygen species. Now, those are like the chemical weapons that immune cells use, right?
That's right. They're these highly reactive molecules that can damage bacteria. But CPSA, it acts like a shield. It protects Mycobacterium tuberculosis from those attacks.
It's wearing body armor on top of everything else.
Exactly. And, it gets even more interesting because different types of macrophages are involved at various stages of tuberculosis infection. And this protein, CPSA, it's crucial for the bacteria to actually spread from one macrophage type to another, which allows it to really disseminate throughout the lung, making the infection much harder to contain.
I'm getting the sense that Mycobacterium tuberculosis is not just a microbe. It's like a master strategist, right?
Right.
It's manipulating cells. It's disrupting communication pathways. It's even orchestrating its own spread throughout the body. This is like microscopic warfare on a whole new level.
I couldn't agree more. It really shows how adaptable and resilient these microorganisms can be. Speaking of adaptability, let's switch gears for a second. Let's talk about a virus that's known for hijacking the immune system in a whole other way, HIV.
Oh, yeah, HIV. HIV is, well, infamous for attacking the immune system directly. From the articles, it seems like its main strategy isn't so much about hiding, it's more about taking control, wouldn't you say?
I would agree, yeah. HIV, it's a master manipulator, and one of its key weapons is this protein called NEF. And unlike the strategies we've talked about so far, which, they really focus on evading detection, NEF actually allows HIV to directly control the immune response.
Okay. I'm listening. How does NEF work?
Well, remember those MHC molecules that we were talking about? The ones that macrophages use to, display antigens?
Yes.
And alert other immune cells?
Uh-huh.
Nef targets those molecules directly. It basically downregulates both MHCI and MHCI on the surface of infected cells.
Wait, so it's interfering with that whole, like, wanted poster system?
Yes.
Does that mean the infected cells become invisible to the immune system?
Exactly. By reducing the expression of MHC molecules, HIV essentially makes those infected cells invisible to the immune system.
So it's like putting a cloak of invisibility on the infected cells.
Yes. And Nef does even more. It disrupts the formation of immunological synapses.
Immunological synapses. Now, what are those?
Well, those are like the communication hubs between immune cells. Imagine there are these meeting points where immune cells come together and they exchange information about potential threats.
Okay.
Nef disrupts those meetings.
So it's like cutting off the lines of communication.
Exactly. And this prevents the immune system from mounting an effective, coordinated response against the virus. It's like a divide and conquer strategy, right? It weakens the immune system by preventing it from working together.
Wow. HIV really is a control freak. I also remember the articles mentioned something called virological synapses. What are those?
Virological synapses, those are these really fascinating structures. HIV uses them for direct cell-to-cell transmission, so it's like a secret tunnel system, right? Allows the virus to move from one cell to the next without being exposed to the outside environment where it would be vulnerable to, antibodies and other defenses.
So it's like a cellular game of tag.
Yeah.
Passing the virus from one cell to another without ever letting go.
You could say that. And this direct cell-to-cell spread, it's so much more efficient than just relying on free-floating viral particles to infect new cells. And here's another interesting thing. Other infections in the body, they can actually boost HIV replication.
Wait, really? That doesn't make sense. How could another infection actually help HIV?
Well, remember, HIV targets specific immune cells, right?
All right.
And so some other infections can activate those very same cells.
Oh, I see.
So it inadvertently makes them more susceptible to HIV infection.
It's like accidentally leaving the door open for the virus to just walk right in.
Exactly, which, highlights just how complex that interplay is between different infections and the immune system. Okay, now we've talked about viruses and parasites, but there's another microbial culprit that uses some pretty intriguing tactics. Candida albicans.
Oh, yeah. Candida albicans. It can be both friend and foe, right?
Exactly.
Lives harmlessly in our bodies, but it can also cause all sorts of, pesky infections.
Yeah.
What does it do to avoid the immune system?
Well, Candida albicans, it's a master of shape-shifting, and its ability to actually evade the immune system is closely tied to its cell wall, which is this really dynamic structure that protects the fungus from the outside world.
So the cell wall, it's interesting. What's so special about it?
Think of the fungal cell wall as like this suit of armor. And in Candida albicans, this armor is covered in a layer of mannins, which are these sugar molecules, and they act as a shield. And these mannins, they hide beta-glucans, which are actually very potent immune activators. So it essentially makes the fungus invisible to certain immune cells.
Wait, so it's using sugar as camouflage?
It is, and it just goes to show how these microbes can really exploit even, seemingly simple molecules for their benefit. But here's the twist, right? The fungal cell wall, it's not static. It's constantly changing in response to its environment. So factors like low oxygen levels or acidic conditions, those can trigger changes in the composition of the cell wall. And this can further enhance its ability to evade detection.
So it's not just wearing a camouflage suit, it's actively adapting its disguise.
Exactly. And that adaptability is, a big part of what makes Candida albicans so successful at evading the immune system. But there's another wrinkle to this story. While mannins can act as a shield, they can also trigger an immune response in certain cells, like monocytes.
Hold on. So it's both hiding and, waving a red flag at the same time? I'm a little confused. How does that work?
Well, it's this delicate balancing act, right? So sometimes that mannan layer, it might be thin enough to allow some beta-glucan exposure, which would then trigger an immune response. But other times, it might be thick enough to completely mask the beta-glucans and prevent detection.
So it's like it's playing this game, this risky game of trying to figure out how much to reveal, how much to conceal.
Yeah, you got it. And it really highlights just how complex that interplay is between the microbes and the immune system. It's not just always hide or attack. Sometimes it's this delicate dance of adaptation and manipulation.
This is all so fascinating, but my head's starting to spin. These microbes, they're so tiny, yet they have these incredible strategies for survival.
It is a constant battle, right, between the host and the microbe. And both sides are always evolving. They're adapting to try to gain an advantage. It really is amazing, isn't it? The more you learn about these strategies, the more you realize how complex and dynamic this microscopic world really is.
It's like this epic saga. It's unfolding right under our noses, but with, well, microbes and immune cells instead of, knights and dragons.
Exactly. And one of the most fascinating parts of it all is this idea of size exclusion as a way to avoid phagocytosis.
Size exclusion.
Yeah. We touched on this a bit with Candida and its shape-shifting, but it's actually something a lot of microbes use. Certain fungi, some bacteria.
Size exclusion. So it's basically too big to swallow.
Right. If an immune cell can't physically engulf a microbe, then it can't destroy it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And microbes do this in a couple of ways. Some, like certain fungi, they can actually change their shape and their size to become too large to be eaten.
Like when Candida albicans transforms from its yeast form to those long branching hyphae.
Exactly. Those hyphae, they can grow so much larger than individual immune cells, it becomes physically impossible for them to be engulfed, like trying to, fit a giant sequoia tree into a thimble.
Okay, that's a pretty vivid image.
Yeah.
So the fungus is basically outsmarting the immune system by just becoming a giant. Does this size change? Does it affect the infection in any other way?
It does. This size advantage also helps those hyphae penetrate tissues more easily, which makes the infection harder to contain.
So it's not just evading capture, it's actively invading too.
Exactly. Evade and invade.
Clever. But what about microbes that can't change their shape so drastically? Are there other ways for them to pull off this size exclusion thing?
Oh, absolutely. Some bacteria, for instance, they use a different tactic. They aggregate together and form what are called biofilms.
Biofilms, those are like those slimy layers that you sometimes find like in your sink drain.
Exactly. And as gross as they might seem in our homes, biofilms are a brilliant survival strategy for microbes. They're like communities of microbes encased in this protective matrix. And this matrix, it can adhere to surfaces.
So they're building a fortress.
Right, a fortress. And this fortress, it doesn't just provide physical protection from the immune system, it also makes it really hard for immune cells to actually get inside and reach the individual bacteria that are living within it.
Like trying to, break through a medieval castle wall.
Exactly. So we've got microbes hiding, changing shape, building fortresses. What other tricks do they have?
Right, what else can they do?
Well, one really fascinating aspect is something we haven't touched on yet, and that is the ability of some microbes to manipulate host cell signaling.
Manipulating host cell signaling. That sounds a little intense. Are we talking like mind control here?
Not quite mind control, but close. Host cell signaling pathways, think of them as like communication networks that cells use to regulate all their different functions. And what happens is some microbes have evolved ways to interfere with these pathways to basically turn the cell's own machinery against itself.
So they're like sending in these fake messengers with false instructions.
Exactly. And these false instructions can have all kinds of effects depending on, which pathway is being targeted. So, for instance, some microbes can manipulate these pathways to prevent the host cells from undergoing apoptosis.
Apoptosis, that's programmed cell death, right?
Right. It's a natural process that gets rid of damaged or infected cells. But by interfering with apoptosis, these microbes can actually make themselves immortal, right? Because they're preventing the host cell from basically self-destructing. And that gives them more time to replicate and spread.
So they're hijacking the cell's suicide button.
Pretty much. It's a very effective way to ensure their own survival.
Yeah. Are there any other examples of this, of microbes messing with host cell signaling?
Oh, yeah, tons. So some microbes can manipulate these pathways to suppress the production of inflammatory molecules.
Oh, okay.
And that dampens the immune response, so it allows the microbes to spread undetected.
So not only are they avoiding detection, they're actively suppressing the alarm system.
Exactly. And some can even manipulate pathways to, get this, attract immune cells to the site of infection, but then prevent those cells from actually working properly. So it's like a decoy system.
Wait, they're luring the immune cells into a trap.
Yes. It's a brilliant, albeit devious, tactic. By attracting those immune cells to the wrong place, they can distract the immune system from where the real infection is happening, and that gives them a chance to get established before the immune system actually catches on.
I gotta say, I'm blown away by how complex and, ingenious these strategies are.
Yeah.
It's like they've been studying our immune systems for millions of years just to figure out all the loopholes.
And they have been. It's this constant evolutionary arms race. Both sides, the microbes and the immune system, are adapting and evolving, always trying to outmaneuver each other. But here's something else to think about. Not all microbes are enemies. In fact, most of the microbes that live in and on our bodies are beneficial. They're even essential for our health.
You're talking about the human microbiome.
Yes. All those trillions of microbes that live in our gut, on our skin, everywhere.
Yeah.
And it turns out that some of these, what we call commensal microbes, the ones that normally live in harmony with us, they also have the ability to evade the immune system.
Wait, so even the good guys are playing hide and seek with the immune system. Why would they need to do that?
It's a fascinating question, and researchers are still working on figuring that out. One idea is that maybe this immune evasion is actually helpful for maintaining a healthy balance in the microbiome. You see, the immune system is constantly on patrol, right? It's looking for anything that might be a threat. And if it was constantly attacking every single microbe it encountered, it would create a lot of unnecessary inflammation.
Inflammation? But isn't that a natural part of the immune response?
It is. Inflammation is really important for fighting off infections, healing injuries. But if there's too much of it, it can actually be harmful. It can lead to chronic diseases, other health problems. So some of these commensal microbes seem to have evolved these ways to dampen the immune response, just enough to prevent that excessive inflammation.
So they're kind of like peacekeepers.
Exactly. Keeping the immune system in check. It's a very delicate balance, and researchers are still trying to figure out all the details of how these commensal microbes are actually interacting with the immune system to maintain that balance.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? I mean, this research has the potential to really change how we understand the microbiome and its role in our health.
Absolutely. This is also fascinating, but I'm starting to feel like we need a whole new vocabulary to talk about this microscopic world. I mean, we've got spies, masterminds, fortresses, peacekeepers. It's like a whole new language. It is. Yeah. It just goes to show, how complex and fascinating that interplay is between the microbes and the immune system. But before we wrap things up, I want to talk about one more important concept, antigenic variation. We saw it with malaria, but it's a strategy that lots of different microbes use.
Antigenic variation. That's where the microbe's constantly changing its appearance, right? Like the malaria parasite and its PFE-MP1 coat.
Exactly. And it's really remarkable because it's an example of what's called convergent evolution. It's a strategy that's popped up again and again independently in all sorts of microbes, bacteria, viruses, parasites, because it's just so effective.
So nature's like, hey, if you want to survive, you better learn how to change your outfit.
Exactly. This constant shape-shifting, it's incredibly effective at evading the immune system's adaptive response, because the adaptive response, it relies on recognizing specific antigens to mount a targeted attack.
So if the microbe keeps changing its antigens, the immune system can never really get a good grip on it.
Right. It's like trying to shoot a moving target, a target that's constantly changing its speed and direction. And that's a big part of why certain microbes like HIV and the influenza virus are so hard to vaccinate against.
It's because by the time the immune system learns to recognize one version, it's already morphed into something else.
Right. This constant evolution, this adaptation, that's what makes these microbes such formidable opponents in the arms race against our immune systems.
It's both impressive and a little bit scary, don't you think?
It is.
So, okay, we've got microbes hiding, shape-shifting, manipulating host cell signaling, and constantly changing their appearance. Are there any other major strategies we haven't talked about yet?
Oh, there are lots of other fascinating strategies out there. But one that's especially interesting is the way that some microbes can actually use the immune response to their advantage. So instead of just evading it, they can hijack certain parts of the immune response to help themselves survive and spread.
So they're not just avoiding the immune system, they're using it. How do they do that?
Well, one example is the way some microbes can exploit inflammation. Remember, we were talking about how inflammation is kind of a double-edged sword?
Yes.
Well, some microbes have figured out how to tip those scales in their favor. Instead of trying to suppress inflammation, they can actually trigger a really exaggerated inflammatory response, and that disrupts the normal immune balance and just creates chaos.
So wait, they're intentionally making things worse. Why would they do that?
I know, it seems kind of counterintuitive. But in the middle of all that inflammatory chaos, these microbes, they can often thrive. That excessive inflammation, it can damage host tissues, which then creates new niches for the microbes to colonize. And it can disrupt the normal function of immune cells, which makes the host more vulnerable to infection.
So it's like they're setting off a fire alarm to create a distraction while they rob the bank.
Exactly. High risk, high reward. Right. And it really shows just how, complex and unpredictable that relationship is between the microbes and the immune system. But there's another even subtler way that they can exploit the immune response by modulating the balance of different types of immune cells.
Modulating the immune balance. I'm not sure I follow.
So our immune system, it has all these different types of cells, each one with its own function. Some, like macrophages and neutrophils, those are part of what we call the innate immune response. That's the body's first line of defense, right?
Right.
Others, like T cells and B cells, those are part of the adaptive immune response. That one is more targeted, more specific.
So it's like having a general army and then, specialized units for certain missions.
That's a great analogy. And these different immune cells, they often work together in a very coordinated way to fight off infections. But some microbes have figured out how to disrupt this balance, how to tip the scales in their favor.
Okay. So how do they do that?
Well, some can produce molecules that suppress the activity of certain immune cells while actually promoting the activity of others.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, some microbes can suppress the activity of T cells, which are really important for controlling viral infections. But at the same time, they can promote the activity of regulatory T cells, which normally help to dampen the immune response to prevent autoimmunity. So by shifting that balance, the microbe creates an environment that's more favorable for its own survival.
So it's like the microbe's a puppet master. It's pulling the strings of the immune system to make sure it wins.
That's a great way to put it. And this ability to manipulate that immune balance just shows how sophisticated these microbes really are. They're not just evading detection. They're actively shaping the battlefield to their advantage.
This is incredible. It makes you wonder what other tricks they have up their sleeves that we haven't even discovered yet.
I'm sure there are many more. I mean, microbial diversity is so vast, we've really only just begun to understand their complex interactions with our immune system. But one thing's for sure, the more we learn about these microbial strategies, the better we'll be at developing new ways to prevent and treat those infectious diseases.
I think that's a perfect segue into the final part of our deep dive. I mean, we've talked a lot about how microbes evade the immune system, but I'm curious, what are your thoughts on what all this means for the future of medicine? What are the key takeaways from all these, well, sometimes amazing and sometimes slightly terrifying strategies?
Yeah, it really makes you appreciate just how challenging this whole fight against infectious diseases really is.
Right. It's not just about coming up with new drugs or vaccines. It's about really getting like a deep understanding of this dance, this intricate dance between microbes and our immune systems. A dance that's been going on, for millions of years.
Millions of years.
It's like we're trying to choreograph a ballet, but the dancers are, constantly improvising, coming up with new moves.
Right. That's a great analogy. And that's, why it's so important that research in this area just keeps going. The more we learn about these strategies, the better we'll be at predicting their next moves and then coming up with effective ways to counter them.
So we need to kind of shift our thinking a bit. Instead of just trying to, kill microbes, maybe we should be focusing on understanding them better, like how they interact with the immune system and finding ways to disrupt their strategies.
I think that's a really good point. It's not always about eradication. Sometimes it's about restoring balance, like nudging the immune system in the right direction.
It's almost like we need to become microbial diplomats. We need to learn to negotiate with these organisms instead of, always waging war.
That's a great way to put it. And this approach, it could be helpful not just for, infectious diseases, but for other things too. Autoimmune disorders, allergies, even cancer.
Whoa, okay. How could understanding how microbes evade the immune system possibly help with something like cancer?
Well, let's take autoimmunity, for example. That's where the immune system attacks the body's own tissues. So if we can figure out how microbes manipulate the immune system, how they dampen the inflammatory response, maybe we can use those same principles to treat those autoimmune diseases.
So instead of trying to suppress the entire immune system, which is, what a lot of current treatments do, we could just focus on fine-tuning it.
Yes. Selectively modulating specific pathways.
We could be like borrowing strategies from the microbes.
Exactly. And that same logic, it could apply to allergies too, right? Where the immune system overreacts to things that are harmless. If we can understand how microbes suppress those allergic responses, then, maybe we can develop new therapies that that mimic those mechanisms.
It's almost like we're turning the microbes' weapons against them, isn't it?
Exactly. And it shows the incredible potential of this research. I mean, by studying how microbes manipulate the immune system, we might just discover a whole bunch of new ways to treat all sorts of diseases.
This is all so exciting, but I have to admit it's also a bit daunting. I mean, we still have so much to learn about these little masters of disguise.
We do, absolutely. But that's what makes this field so fascinating, right? It's full of mysteries and so many possibilities. And every time we learn something new, we get a little bit closer to understanding, that intricate relationship between microbes and our bodies. And that paves the way for a healthier future for everyone.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a pretty good overview of the world of immune evasion, haven't we?
We have.
We've covered a lot of ground: hiding, shape-shifting, hijacking host cell signaling, exploiting the immune response.
We have. And, we've only just scratched the surface.
But hopefully we've sparked some curiosity and maybe inspired our listeners to learn even more about this amazing microscopic world.
I hope so.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and never underestimate the power of these tiny but mighty organisms.
Couldn't have said it better myself.